the Assembly as a whole. So as I said this morning, we're going to spend a bit more time just sort of stepping back, looking at the goals that we have from right across the whole stream, so for diet, for land use and for lifestyle, and just checking in that actually, these are things that we think are going to work and drive change in a fair and effective way. We're also going to spend some time in the second half of the session today where you get to talk to each other a bit more across the groups. So you'll get to share some of the things that you've really identified as being going to be really important to focus on. You're also going to get the chance to share some of the ideas that you have about where there might need to be some real changes made to the recommendations, some of the changes that you've made to recommendations, or whether you think actually there needs to be something new added. So these are the things you'll get to share with the rest of the group. And once you've done that, because what we'll be doing between this meeting and the next meeting is sending out sort of consolidated down what we've all worked on over the last couple of weekends. And you'll have the opportunity, because again, you know how it's working. People are looking at some of the same things. Two groups might have come up with slightly different wording for what they think would be the best way. It'll be down to you as the members to actually really choose what are the things you want to take back to the Assembly as a whole to say, look, on the basis of all this work and all this thought and all the consideration we've given them, these are the types of recommendations we think the Assembly as a whole should be making. And you'll have the opportunity to present that back to the other Assembly members who've been in the different streams and basically tell them why you think these things are important and are the things that need to be done and included in our overall recommendations. So I think before I go any further, I just want to see, I think we've got Ruth, our convener, joining us for the afternoon, and just wanted to see if Ruth, if you wanted to sort of say hello or a few words before we got started. And if
So thanks, Kayla. Just to say hello, I'm joining you for this afternoon. This is my first foray into the diet and lifestyle stream, so I'm here to listen. And if I pop into your group, I hope that's okay. If it's not, just let me know and I'll happily leave. But I'm really just here to listen and support you. And I've had a great morning this morning in the transport group stream. So yeah, I'm hugely impressed as ever with the facilitation and with the level of deep engagement that Assembly members are bringing to this whole process. So thank you, and back to Kayla.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay, now I promised you that I would share the results of what we did around fairness. Okay, so this is something we're going to ask you to be considering a bit this afternoon as well. So I'm just going to share my screen and you'll be able to see. If you remember, when we spoke about the sort of propositions on fairness, we said very much that it was about what should we be doing. There's lots of different types of ways of considering fair. So we'd come up with the whole list. I think we'd come up with a list of about 21 different things around the propositions on fairness. And then we asked you all individually to, I suppose, prioritize or identify the 10 from that list that seemed, most important to you to make sure that our recommendations were fair. So I'm going to now show you what you came up with. And this was across the whole Assembly. So the basic starting point was that, to be fair, the recommendations that we as an Assembly present to Parliament should. So the top two there, that over 70% of the members put in their top 10 and agreed were really important. Take into account the needs of different communities across Scotland, recognising there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that seems to fit with some of the things I know you've been talking about. Target the highest emitters, so the organisations and individuals with the highest carbon footprint are the ones that are being asked to make the biggest changes. So they were the ones that have come out on the top there. Then we had a set that were prioritised or included in that sort of priority list by 60 to 70% of the members right across the whole Assembly. So we've got the act immediately, so future generations are not unfairly burdened with the responsibility of making change. emphasise that it's everyone's responsibility to make changes, so individuals, communities, business and government. Support people to grow their knowledge and understanding to make informed decisions. Help those with the least capacity to make change, to play their part. And the other one there, support workers in industries where change will lead to job losses. And that was definitely something I know people have been considering around that idea of how do you make those fair changes. And then the last four on the screen here were agreed or prioritised by over half or more of the members of the Assembly. So it's spread resources and the costs of change equitably rather than equally, so that those who can afford the most pay the most. Be affordable to all and not disadvantage people on lower incomes. Not increase social and economic inequalities. And those three really sort of link together in terms of, you know, where does this have an impact on communities and on individuals? And then protecting vulnerable and disadvantaged groups from the impact of climate change and measures to combat it, ensuring that no one gets left behind. So that 10 were all agreed and prioritised by more than 50% of the members. And I think they're things that we're going to be asking you to really keep in consideration as you're looking at goals, and when we come back together as a stream, when we start finalising our goals and our recommendations for the whole Assembly. And just to say, the others that were on the list, this is not about discounting them, but just recognising that they were slightly less priority for some of the members. So we've still got there not disadvantaging rural communities, prioritising measures and investment that benefit everyone for the common good, cost effective and consider implications for the public purse, be free from self-interest and non-partisan, not have a negative impact on developing countries, help high carbon industries through the transition, involve ongoing engagement with people most affected by change, not disadvantage people with disabilities, and consider Scotland's impact and global share of carbon emissions, historically and for embodied carbon. So all of these things were still priorities that you identified collectively as being important considerations around fairness. They just were considered less important by some of the members than the first ones we had there. And then none of the propositions on fairness were voted for by nobody. So, but there were a few that not so many people put in their top 10 as being important. So hopefully, and we'll get these all sent out to you after the weekend as well. But as you're thinking through things this afternoon, I encourage you to sort of, we've focused a lot on effectiveness this weekend and last weekend. Now it's time to make sure that when we're reviewing things, you know, we're thinking fairness as well. So very shortly, we're going to put you back into your breakout groups and give you some time to sort of step back, look at the goals as a whole, look at the goals from across the whole stream. We've very much been working in, right, let's talk about diet now, let's talk about land use now, let's talk about lifestyles and consumption. But actually step back, look at the whole stream, and just really think about whether the types of goals that you're focusing on, the things that you really want to change, will really be the things that will drive how Scotland needs to change to tackle the climate emergency. So before we do that, I know we had a couple of requests for a bit more sort of guidance just around sort of how we're shaping goals and recommendations. So again, I just have a short piece of information I'm going to share with you. A second to get this one. Oh. So I guess there was a couple of questions were asked there about, you know, the difference between the sort of goals and the recommendations, and just keeping these things separate, you know. That goals really are what your ambition is. What's the proposed recommendation is trying to achieve? What are the things that we really want to see is different and is the outcome at the end? And then the recommendations focus back on the type of action that that you're suggesting needs to happen in order to achieve that. So if we're thinking about goals, as I said, goal, what you ultimately want to achieve, the difference that will happen. And the recommendations, oh, they've put this on slide for me twice. I have read these before, really, but I'm going to admit it wasn't me who made these ones. Yeah, so what needs to happen to achieve the goal? And if we're thinking about what makes a good recommendation, and this is where, as you're starting to sort of craft things and get a bit more detailed here, we really want you to focus on some of the sort of the wording you're thinking about as well. So if we're thinking about what makes a good recommendation, it is one idea. It doesn't include sort of multiple proposals tried to cram into one. I know we've talked about not wanting to have, you know, too many recommendations that actually, you know, the point and the really important things get lost. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're not trying to cram them all into a smaller number, but still less clear. We want recommendations that are not too abstract, so that it's clear what's being proposed. And although we're talking about that, yes, we're putting our report to Parliament, the report will also be public. We want people right across Scotland to see what sort of things are being recommended and being proposed. So it needs to be quite clear. At the same point, not too specific. It really doesn't need to go into fine details of how something would be implemented. And we all, you know, I know some people have had some concerns about, you know, we don't have the expertise to really dig into how this needs to be implemented. There are other, you know, whether they're sort of policy people, networks, groups, representative organisations, local councils, whoever it might be, that actually might be able to get into the detail, but we need to give them a clear steer. And then the last point there about really focusing in on accessible language, language that whoever is reading this is going to be able to understand and know what you're trying to achieve. So we need to make sure that our recommendations don't include jargon. Does mean we can have specific things or specific terms, but then when we're thinking later about how we present them, we'll need to be able to explain them in a way that actually makes sense to anybody who wants to read them. So hopefully that will have given you a bit of a sense of, yeah, a bit of a way of helping to focus in on what we are doing this afternoon. Firstly, looking back at our goals, and then the opportunity for any kind of last things that when we think about fairness or that you didn't maybe manage to get through this morning, on just to make sure everything's captured so that we can pull it all together, get it back out to you between now and the next meeting, so that you as a stream working on diet, land use and lifestyle can actually agree this is what we're taking back to the rest of the Assembly and this is what we think is important. So hopefully now we're in a position that we can open up the breakout rooms.